Ciao. That's pretty much as far as my Italian goes. So sorry about that. So in this session, what we'll talk about, or what I'll be talking about, is what are your options for running containers on Azure? Who's familiar with Azure? So and so. Okay. So we'll be specifically looking into containers running on Azure and the different options you have. So if we look at containers, kind of the great advantage of containers is basically in their portability. You've got your application, you containerize it, or you package it in a container. You can take it anywhere. So you can grab it, move it from one machine to another. So portability is really key and front and center. When we were looking at running containers on Azure, that's exactly what we wanted to achieve as well. That we keep that portability at basically every level. So you want to run a single container, well, you can do whatever you've done before to run it on Azure. You're running an orchestrator, well, you can do the same thing. And I hope that message comes across while going through the slides, and I have some demos too. So I'll be living somewhat on the edge here, running some containers over a hotel network. Might be a challenge. So quick intro, this is not a marketing session about Azure, but just showing you Azure is Microsoft Cloud Computing Platform. If you've never played with it before. So we got 38 data center regions. There's 30 of them are live, 8 are coming. What is in Azure? It's quite a big pile of services. So we got a bunch of data center infrastructure. So those 38 data center regions that we have across the globe. On top of which we can run some infrastructure services, which you can see at the bottom there. So we got compute, we got storage, we got some networking. Basically all of the basic services that you need for running computing. And then on top of that, we got a whole bunch of application services. And we'll see a number of them here, but mainly we'll be focusing on the infrastructure services. And that's all I'm going to talk about, Azure. Okay. So what are your options for running containers in Azure? So let's start with the familiar part. If you want to run like a single container, either on your dev machine, at some hoster, typically what you do is you just get a virtual machine, right? I guess you're all familiar with virtual machines. So you spin up a virtual machine and you put on the Docker daemon, spin up some containers, single one, multiple ones as you go. And that's basically what you can do as well on Azure. So that's our first kind of easy option. Do the same what you've done before. So you spin up a virtual machine, whether it's Windows or Linux. Yes, Microsoft has Linux machines in their data centers. We support pretty much every single distro. And then you run your Docker containers on those virtual machines. Yeah, so that's easy. So how does it work? Spin up a virtual machine. Either you take a virtual machine which is already prepped and which has container support in there. You might be wondering, so a Windows server and containers, that's kind of weird, Linux and Windows. As of Server 2016, we have now native container support in Windows as well. So you can run Windows containers too on Windows Server and on Windows 10 as well. So spin up, so take a virtual machine image that already has container support in there. So just a few minutes and you're up and running. You got your VM, you've got basically a Docker daemon running on it, and you can take your Docker client from your workstation, just connect to that virtual machine that runs your Docker server. Pretty much it. Yeah, so what you would do as well on premises. So we got some quick starts there. So you can take a base image just with the Docker daemon. We can have a number of prepped container images as well. So if you say, I need some WordPress running in containers, you can just grab it and we'll install the whole thing for you already prepped with the WordPress container on it. Or let's say you have already a virtual machine which does not have container support, and you're saying, well, it would be nice if I had container support on it. So one thing you can do is you can connect to the virtual machine, install the Docker daemon yourself, or you could just activate what we call the Docker extension on that virtual machine straight from a web portal without having to connect into that virtual machine, SSH or RDP, depending on the platform. I'll go through a quick sample of where you can find this. So how does this help us? Running containers on virtual machines. Well, we've gotten rid of the hardware and the cables. So we don't mess with iron and cables. We just spin up a virtual machine, it's running, and we connect to it. Yeah. But apart from that, we need to do everything ourselves still. So you need to manage your virtual machine. Let's say you want to run an orchestrator because you want to go beyond a single container. Let's say you want 10, 100, 1,000 of them. Are you going to install every single machine in a manual way or grab them from the portal, etc., etc.? As you saw in the previous presentation, for what I got from the Italian and what I can understand, luckily the slides were in English, is that setting up an orchestrator is pretty darn complex. There's a lot of pieces involved in setting up an orchestrator, whether it's Kubernetes or Mesos or Docker Swarm. There's a lot of pieces that you need to tie together. And so if you want to do this on virtual machines, well, you're on your own. You need to configure the whole thing yourself. So another option you can do in building on top of infrastructure and virtual machines basically is we have a number of solution templates. So it's basically the full setup of either an enterprise edition for Docker, which contains multiple masters and the whole configuration, all the networking, all the security configured for you. You just take that solution template, fill in some details, and it will spin up the whole thing for you. Or the same thing with an orchestrator. Let's say you want to have DCOS, which is basically an Apache Mesos implementation. Well, that's going to spin up the whole infrastructure for you, just with pretty much a single click or like 5 clicks. Again, how does this help us? Well, it's going to speed up complex deployments of container infrastructure. Yeah, so we've gotten rid of the iron, we've gotten rid of the actual provisioning of the different pieces that make an orchestrator. So that has helped us. However, after that, again, you're on your own. There is no API for you to manage the cluster. For example, your orchestrator, there is no APIs, no command line interfaces to change the security, to add some load balancing, to scale up, scale down. Those things, what you need to do on the individual infrastructure pieces. What we've given you is just a quick start. Yeah. Quick starting the installation of, let's say, an orchestrator. So also there is no specific SLA for this. Yeah, so it's just the individual pieces. Now, let me quickly switch to a demo. It's very small. I'll zoom in a bit. Okay, so let's say we want to create a virtual machine. We can go here. What you see here is the Azure management portal. Yeah. And so we can spin up, let's say we want something for containers. So what we're getting here is a number of solutions that allow us to run containers. And so let's hope the hotel Wi-Fi works with us. So here we could say, I want some containers, a lot more readable. Okay. So let's say we want to have some Docker on Ubuntu. While we're searching. And if the network works with us, and it doesn't, well, you would be able then to see a list of solution templates and virtual machine images. Okay, let's skip that one. So any other item I wanted to show you here is what if we have an existing virtual machine and we want to add some Docker support in there. So either we do an SSH into that machine, or we can go here into the extensions. Yeah, and actually install the Docker extension. So if we have our extension here, we can load here the list of extensions that are available. So we have a number of monitoring extensions. We have other extensions available for you. Well, let's looking here. So the one you can see here. So we have a Docker extension. in just the same way, you have like monitoring extensions for Datadog or Chef if you want to do your configuration management. So those kind of things are available here. But this is just the basic stuff. Let's switch back here. Okay. Now what's next? How can we make this situation better? So how can we actually get an orchestrator that we can really manage, for which we have an API, which is really a service for us, that we can, for which we also have an SLA, a service level agreement. So the question was already asked about who knows Kubernetes, who's using Mesos, or has played with it. Okay, Docker Swarm. Not a lot. So also from the previous presentation, we saw that pretty much 60% of orchestrators that are being used are either Kubernetes, Docker Swarm, or Mesos. Yeah. So that's what we want to provide you with the Azure Container Service. It's basically a service that gives you a means to really quick start your orchestrations for containers, either using DCOS, so Apache Mesos, Kubernetes, or Docker Swarm. So if you're already familiar with those, and pretty much 60% of the people are, we give you a pre-configured, optimized, so streamlined setup of those orchestrators. Yeah. So just a matter of either one command line or a few clicks in the portal, you can spin up your orchestrator. And we do so for the three. And what does that allow you? Well, I talked about at the beginning, containers are all about portability. Orchestrators as well. So hence, when we spin up this setup for, let's say, Mesos or Kubernetes, we want it to be such that all of the tooling that you already know, so let's say you're using GitLab from the previous presentation to connect and do CI/CD onto your Kubernetes orchestrator, that should still work if you have your Kubernetes running on ACS, so Azure Container Service. If you have any command line tools, if you have any graphical tools, or all the web portals or the web-based management tools that come with those orchestrators, they should still work, regardless of where that orchestrator is running on. So you shouldn't even see that it's running on Azure Container Service, which from a marketing perspective is maybe not good. But it should be transparent. And that's what we wanted to achieve here. And so what we do on top of that, so we got all of the standard tooling that comes with the orchestrator, continues to work, but we're adding on top of that like a management layer. So you get a cross-platform command line interface, so it's Linux, Windows, or Mac, for managing the actual Azure Container Service. So let's say you want to scale up the number of agents or scale down, those kind of things. You want to see what services are running. We're adding kind of a command line interface there. You got some portal functionality available too. Yeah. And you get an SLA, so you get a service level agreement on top of that. Hey, and the cool thing, it's free. It's basically just a service for running these orchestrators. You don't pay for the service. Now, as said, we got the three orchestrators running on top of infrastructure. So they're still running on virtual machines, they're running on the networking components, they're running on the storage services in Azure. So it's infrastructure on top of which we install the orchestrator. Now, how do we install this, this orchestrator? For that, we're using what is called an ARM template. So what is an ARM template? It's kind of a JSON file that describes your entire infrastructure. So you get all of the individual components that you need. So you need storage, networking, IP addresses, virtual machines. All of that is described in this ARM template, this JSON file. That could be for a DCOS or a Kubernetes. That could be a few thousands of lines of JSON. So feel free to write them yourselves. I would not recommend it. And so basically we execute this ARM template for you. Yeah, so we're generating and installing it so that you afterwards can run your applications on your orchestrator, which is just transparent and use all of your tooling. The generation of this ARM template, the tooling that underpins it is basically open source. It's called the ACS engine, which is basically the internals of the Azure Container Service. So it's available on GitHub. You can go to Microsoft/ACS engine, see the source code of how we generate these ARM templates. So I said we're generating what we call a streamlined or an optimized setup of these orchestrators. Let's say you're saying, well, streamlined, yes, but not for me. I have a different kind of streamlining, and I want to tweak and tune my orchestrator setup, because that happens. Well, you can do so. You can use the ACS engine, generate your own ARM templates, configure and tweak your orchestrator, and just run it, and it will install using your specific setup. So you got full control still, and you got all of the benefits that come with it. I was asked to give a level 300, so an in-depth session. So I've added some charts here about the different components that are involved in setting up such an orchestrator, just to show you kind of the complexity for setting this up, just to scare you off for doing this manually yourself. So you got availability set. So you got a bunch of masters. This is for Apache Mesos. We got a number of public agents. We got private agents. So Mesos distinguishes between services that are publicly available on the internet and kind of back-end services. So you got public versus private. We got some load balancing on there. We need to open up some ports. So we got some security there. We need public IP addresses actually on the master, because we need to be able to connect into our master server. With our tooling, and so on and so on. And you see a similar image here for Kubernetes. I think the simplest one is Docker Swarm, but still quite impressive if you need to set up all the individual components yourself. You want to see this to work? Yeah, thank you, Wi-Fi. Okay, let's hope we still have Wi-Fi, otherwise there won't be a lot to see. So what you see here is Ubuntu running on Windows 10. Natively. Okay, so what we do here, the cross-platform Azure command line tools, they're quite easy. It's just AZ. And then you can say ACS if you want to manage your Azure Container Service. And we can either list our ACS clusters. So as you can see here, I have 3 ACS clusters running. So I have 2 DCOS ones, and I have 1 Kubernetes cluster. And so what we can do, we can show the details. Let's show, for example, the one for Italy, DCOS. And its name is DCOS cluster 2. So we'll see immediately if we have some network. And that will return basically the details of that specific cluster. Okay, there's going to be a lot of wait time in this session. Okay, no more network. Okay, let's see if we got this one to work now. Nice. Let's start typing first. And let's give us the advanced output, which is a full JSON output. And see if that one comes back. Okay, finally, we got some results. So what you're seeing here is actually the full details of your of a DCOS or an Apache Mesos server cluster. So you can see on the top here, there, let me show here, we can see our endpoint for our agents. So those are the public agents, so the ones that are publicly available. Here at the bottom, we can see the full URL of our management endpoint for Mesos. And we could see the number of master servers is 1, so we got the count of 1. And we got 2 agents up and running there. So that's just being able to connect to us. Now, how do we create something on it? Yeah, or let's say we wanna watch the actual Mesos web UI, yeah, because we're familiar with that. So what we can do, and I'm switching now to a DOS prompt just to show you how cross-platform everything is. I'm going to So I'm going to spin up here, I'm just going to create a VPN tunnel and browse to the actual management portal of the DCOS cluster. And this is just using the same command line interfaces, so AZ, ACS, and then we're doing a DCOS browse, which will open up, hopefully. So we're spinning up a VPN tunnel, and it's opening now the portal for Apache Mesos. Yes, okay. So here you can see the management portal of Apache Mesos. Works as you expected. If you're familiar with Apache Mesos, you could see your nodes. So we got our 3 nodes. So we got one private node. We got one public node. We got 2 private nodes here, and they're up and running. Now the nice thing is when we spin up this the streamlined interface. Let me switch here to. Let me switch to the marathon part of Mesos. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. We got too many troubles with the Wi-Fi. Let's see if we can then do it with Kubernetes. So you should see like the marathon interface, which allows you to kind of create new applications, orchestrate those applications across the different nodes you have in your cluster. Okay, so using the marathon service, this is also from Apache, gives you that orchestration layer on top of Apache Mesos. So again, a web-based UI, similar to what you will see in Kubernetes. So let's take a look. In previous session, you saw kind of some command lines to connect to the Kubernetes cluster. So with kubectl, let's see if we can do the same thing here. Okay. Excuse me? Yeah, sorry. It's because we have show for other orchestrators and get for this one. Okay, so we're getting our nodes from our Kubernetes cluster. So we can see here we got one master, we got 2 agents, 2 agent nodes in our Kubernetes cluster. So what we're doing here is we're spinning up an Nginx Docker container. So we're using the image Nginx in 3 replicas. If we now should do a Docker get pods. So we learned what pods were in the previous session. They're actually kind of processes or virtual containers that are running our actual container. We can see that we now have 3 instances of Nginx running on our Kubernetes cluster. So all this, not to show all the fanciness of Kubernetes or DCOS, but just to show you, you could use the same tooling, either it's a web-based UI from Kubernetes or Mesos, or just use Docker Swarm using the Docker client tools. But just to show you that everything still works as you would expect. And so all the tooling, such as, for example, GitLab, will continue to work even if you have your orchestrator running on Azure Container Service. Speed this one up. So in the same way as you saw for GitLab, you can also set, using the Azure Container Service, spin up a complete CI/CD pipeline. Yeah. So it's just a single command line that you do. So you do Azure Container create release. What it will do is it will, in our case, use Visual Studio Team Services, so cloud-based infrastructure for running CI and CD. Create some releases, deploy it to Azure Container Service, and what's more, it's also going to deploy to what we call the Azure Container Registry, which is just a private Docker registry. Yeah, so you get On Azure, next to the actual Azure Container Service, you also get a private registry where you can create your repos and manage them in a private manner without having to go to Docker Hub, for example. So again, the Azure Container Registry is just a free service. You just pay for whatever storage you're using for maintaining your images in that repo. So again, it's just a command line away, and you can use it as any other private Docker repo. So again, portability is key. Whatever we do, make sure that you can still integrate it in whatever you have right now, whatever practices you have, whatever tools you're using. So there are some more options, which are then what we call container-based PaaS, so platform as a service. Previous ones were building on top of infrastructure components. With the container-based PaaS solutions, we're basically saying we give you a platform for running containers, and you don't have to care whatever is underneath it. And so the first one is the Azure Service Fabric, which is one that we're using internally as well. So it has been running for a few years to run our Azure platform. So a number of Azure services are running basically on Azure Service Fabric. So who knows Cortana? Oh, okay. Who knows Siri and Google Now? Okay, well, not that many, but still, they're equivalent. And you can set them up against each other and ask who's the best. They can fight. So they are running on Azure Service Fabric, which is basically a microservices platform. So you can build microservices applications. So it's a developer platform, but it's also a container orchestrator. So because if you're building microservices architectures where you want to scale your applications across multiple nodes and split up your application in different smaller pieces, well, you need some orchestration to happen. Because you need some self-healing, we need some resource planning and moving things around when things go bad. You need to have rolling upgrades, where you push a new version of a given microservice without having any downtime. Yeah. So all of that orchestration can also be applied for Docker containers. So you can give Azure Service Fabric a Docker container. So you just create, in this specific case, not a JSON file, but it's an XML file, which describes your container information. And then your application, you'll have a similar, this is a service manifest. We have an application manifest as well, which contains multiple service manifests. Yeah. And so you split up your application in multiple services. You give those XML files to the Azure Service Fabric, and it will spin up whatever is needed on its cluster of nodes. And it will spread it as it sees fit. So you don't care about infrastructure components, networking, IP addresses. You don't care. You just say, this is my orchestrator platform, run something. That's platform as a service versus managing infrastructure. And so it goes and kind of splits all of these container images over, let's in this specific case, over a 5 cluster node, or 5 node cluster, sorry. And here you can see actually the management portal, so you got a web-based management portal. Note also that Azure Service Fabric can run in Azure. It can run on premises. It can run in a different cloud provider. It can run anywhere, on Windows, on Linux. Okay. And you get this management portal actually for following up and monitoring your applications and moving things around. Now one other option, or one other what we call PaaS container options are, there's such things as Red Hat OpenShift and Cloud Foundry. Those are also container solutions for orchestrating applications. You can run them as well on Azure. So we got solution templates for running them. So it's a matter of just clicking and we got the infrastructure running for you. Now, again, use whatever you have. Azure should not be something that decides whether you can do it or not. It should always be possible. And so the final one are kind of some special cases. It's what if you have a single container and you want to run it on PaaS? No orchestration involved. I have a container, just run it. So there's 2 options. You can either run it on Azure, what we call Azure Batch. So if you need to do some repetitive work, if you have every day a single, a given process that needs to run on a container, or a number of copies of a single container, well, you can start an Azure Batch process and it will go and kick off. Or we have web apps if you have some web workloads. Basically, web apps are this web hosting solution. Typically, you give it some source code, Node.js or PHP or Ruby or .NET if you want. You give that to the web app and it will run. The same thing here. You give it a Linux container, whatever is on it, it will run it. So orchestration, you don't care, you just say, I have a container that has a web workload, just run it. You can just give it. That's kind of the easy, quick start solution that we have at the end here. Okay. So I finish off, give you some resources. I think, are you sharing the slides? Yeah, so you can get the slides, you can get these links here. How to get started with Azure, with the actual container service. Look at the ACS engine if you want to run your own Azure Service Fabric or customize your cluster configuration. And so with that, I hope you got my message about portability and giving you choices. So with Azure, it should be transparent. You're dealing with containers, Azure should not be a deal breaker. With that, I want to thank you for your attention.